de switcher vers l'anglais. Donc, merci de nous avoir rejoints pour cette table ronde dédiée à la littérature féminine anglophone de la diaspora marocaine. So, I'm very happy and excited to meet you all. I knew some of you by name, but we never got a chance to meet, especially the one living in Australia, because like it's on the other side of the planet. So I'm very happy to meet you. So let's introduce you first, all of you. First, Mhani Alaoui. Hi. You are an anthropologist and you are a writer based in Casablanca, but you lived before in New York for 12 years. You studied there, especially you graduated in comparative literature and history, and you had a PhD in anthropology from Princeton University. And you wrote 3 novels. The first one was in 2015, Dreams of Mariam Tayer. The second one was in 2018, Ayadain. And the third one, which has been translated into French by La Croisée des Chemins, right? It's here. It's La Maison de la Rue des Papillons. Welcome. Okay, you'll correct me when I give you the first question. Our friend from Australia, I'm so happy to meet you, Nadia Mahjouri. You are an Australian writer of Moroccan descent. You come from the very far island of Tasmania, am I right? You were a counselor and group facilitator specialized in maternal mental health. And your first novel, Half Truths, it was published in Australia by Penguin Random House in 2025. So it's very new. It's your last baby. And you also host the award-winning podcast, The Real Truth, Motherhood and the Writing Life. Thanks for being here. And last but not least, from London, Saeida Rouass. You were a security and violence prevention consultant. You worked for NGOs all around the world in very many countries like Kenya, Indonesia, Nigeria, Oman also. And you wrote 2 novels, The first one was 18 Days of Spring in Winter. It's in 2015. And the last one is The Assembly of the Dead from Jamal Fna in Marrakech in 2017. So thanks a lot for all being here. Vous n'entendez pas? Ok. Ah, vous avez des casques pour ceux qui le veulent, pour la traduction vers l'arabe ou vers le français, pardon. Si vous le voulez, vous levez la main et on vous en distribue. I have to confess, I'm very scared to not understand the Australian accent, but I hope I will succeed in doing that. Oh, thank you. I have a saver. Everything is fine. So maybe the first round of questions would be just to allow our public who might not know you well or discover you, maybe a first round to discover the 3 of you better. So my first question is, can you tell us about your personal and your literary journey, because you all had other professions before writing books. So at which point in your life did you decide to write books and why? Maybe Mhani? We're doing on this way?
Thank you, Hanane. Thank you everyone for being here. So for the question of why writing, is that the question? Our journey. So I've always wanted to write. I come from a family of writers. My mother is a writer. She's here. My 2 grandfathers' literature was very important for them. So we grew up in a families of books and writing, and where literature was really important. So that's the conditioning to be part of that kind of family. And then I studied in the US, and as you said, I studied literature, so there was always reading involved. Since I was really young, reading was always very important. And then when I went to the US, I studied literature and then anthropology. Why anthropology? Because for me, anthropology was the normal next step, because the social sciences are a way also of understanding society, and that's what interests me when I write. It's the way we function as groups, as individuals, what we traverse, what traverses us, that we are conscious of and not conscious of. And so this is, I guess, my journey, very simply put.
Just a last point I forgot to mention for this question is in which way, if so, this decision to write is related to your personal relation to Morocco, because we'll get to that later, but Morocco is very present in your books, the three of you. So in which point this decision was related to your own questioning about Moroccan society or about your relation to Morocco?
So if you've read my books, or if you're familiar with my books, they're all about women and gender in Morocco. So gender roles, oppression, dispossession, but also struggles that we have here. And that's, for me, writing is a way also of expressing all these struggles and also all our advancements here. And so, because I'm based here in Casablanca, most of my books are based in Casablanca because this is what I know best now. Perhaps if I still lived in the United States, then it would be about something completely different. But writing is also where you are, so that's why.
Thank you so much. Can you understand me? Okay, I can try.
So far, I'm good.
If you prefer, I can try my French. But my journey to writing, really, in order to understand my journey to this point, you need to understand my connection to Morocco, because for me, I grew up in Australia with a white mother and my white stepfather. So I knew that I had this body that was Moroccan and I had a name that was Moroccan, but I didn't know really anything more than that. And so I had set out really to find out about my Moroccan identity as a young woman, as a new mother. And when I found my family eventually in Morocco, which is part of the story that has been fictionalized in Half Truth, I heard that I had my grandmother I hadn't met. She died 2 years, sadly, before I'd arrived, but she had been married at 11 and she had had my father at 13. She was very young. And that, as soon as I heard that, I thought, I want to write her story. And actually, that was the first time I ever thought, and that was in my early 20s. Now, it took me another 20 years to actually sit down and write this book. But I knew that as soon as I heard her story, I felt so familiar with my family in Morocco, even though I had a different language, a different culture. I hadn't grown up with this way of being Moroccan, but I knew that I felt the same. So I knew that my grandmother had felt the same as me. So what was it to be an 11-year-old, Amazigh woman from the village outside of Marrakesh in the 1940s to be married? So I just needed to know about her. And so basically it was a COVID novel. The world shut down and I had the opportunity to write the story I'd always wanted to write.
So it's your personal journey and your personal quest that led you to the desire to write that story of your grandmother.
Absolutely. And I thought I might show it to nobody. I thought really I was writing this novel for my children in case I were to drop dead, so that my children would have this story to know how it is that we are Australian, but yet we have this beautiful family who are just arriving here in Morocco. And so I wanted to have that story for my children, but as I started to write it, I discovered something about myself, which is that I love to write. And it was like I'm untapping something that had always been in me. My mother was a librarian. I'd grown up loving books. So I'd always been a reader. But the minute I sat down to write, I discovered, oh my goodness, this is the thing I've always been meant to do. So I won't stop now.
Nice. And we're happy that you don't stop. And it's a legacy not only for your children, but also for us as Moroccans to discover also the stories of Moroccans abroad that if it wasn't for that book, maybe we wouldn't know the story of Moroccans in Australia, for example.
Right.
So it's a legacy for everyone. Saeida, same question.
I suppose, when I was 13, I remember you're becoming a teenager, and my mum asked me what I wanted to do when I grow up, and I said I wanted to be an author, and she bought me an electric typewriter. So I'm giving my age away because electric typewriters are no longer, but it was pre-computers. And then I didn't write ever. I started writing for magazines in the UK, just on the side. I'd write articles for magazines and what you, but have never plucked up the courage to write fiction. I think it's quite a scary thing. And then when I turned 40, I was like, oh, I'm really kind of getting old, and I'm either going to do this or not, or I overcome this kind of fear that I have. And so I was living in the Sultanate of Oman at the time, in a beautiful kind of fishing village, and I decided that I was going to give myself like 3 days of not leaving the house to see what happened. And so I kind of sat down and filled the house with my supplies, coffee primarily. And after those 3 days, I had 18 days of spring in winter, which is set in Egypt, so not necessarily Morocco themed at all. But I'd also lived in Egypt, and I'd been there just as the Arab Spring was starting, and I'd left in September, October, and then January it kind of kicked off. And I remember just thinking about the people that I'd left behind in Egypt and how they had been swept up into that Arab Spring and what might have the stories that they'd had in that. And then, you know, I grew up in East London, in London. It's like Jack the Ripper territory. I grew up in Whitechapel. You know, I'm a Moroccan girl walking around Whitechapel, and there's like, oh, Jack the Ripper was there, and Jack the Ripper was there. And then one day I kind of was Googling serial killers, don't ask me why, and I found the Moorish Jack the Ripper, and I just thought, well, I feel like that's meant for me.
We're getting to that. We're getting to the topics and stories that you develop in your books, but for you, in your case, the decision to write was a teenager dream first, and then what triggered in Oman during these 3 days this desire to, was it a testimony of what you saw and what you witnessed when you were in Egypt? You wanted to give a testimony of that?
Yeah, and also just honestly being 40, turning 40 and being like, I've lived half my life and I've not done this thing, so maybe I should just sit down and try and do it and see what happens. You know?
You are such an inspiration. I'm 48, I should listen to you better. There's another deadline coming up soon. So, yeah, the 50s. Don't scare me. I'm the same. So, since you already started talking about the topics you're developing in your books, maybe we can talk about the topics and the style. I'm getting back to you, Saeida, because the book you're talking about, which takes place in Marrakesh at the early century, 19th century, about this man who was a serial killer who killed more than 30 women. So you write it, you chose the detective novel style. It's not an easy style. So can you tell us about that? And how you work, because you spent time in Marrakesh collecting all the stories you could to write this book.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of was offered the book deal, and I just decided that I was going to pack up my life and move to Marrakesh and be a writer. And went to Marrakesh and was like, this place is crazy. And kind of met loads of people, asked them about this Moorish Jack the Ripper. I found his story in newspaper articles, archives in the British Library in London. I kind of found archives in the American legation in Tangiers. So there was this documented media coverage of this man's crimes, but there was no kind of oral history of it in Marrakesh. And I found that kind of disconnect really interesting, because you can't come from East London without being aware of Jack the Ripper. It's kind of entered the mythology of East London. But there was a man who was literally called the Moorish Jack the Ripper of Morocco, but there was this kind of absence of it. And so for me, it just felt like telling it through the perspective of a detective offered a way into Moroccan society of the time that can be analytical in some ways.
Because it's not very usual in the literature, Moroccan literature, to have this detective novel style, and especially so far in history. And what I see as a common point between your two books is that it's always at a turning point in history, because the book's story takes place right before the colonization of Morocco and the protectorate, and the first one is right about the Arab Spring and the movements in Tahrir Square, etc. So do you have a special attention to history and to contextualize your stories?
I think I like this. I think the fiction comes in where you kind of have a historical moment and you can kind of imagine how that historical moment is played out in people's lives. And I think that's the interesting thing. You read history and without that kind of historiography, it kind of loses aliveness to it. And I think it's a shift in society, but what that looks like in everyday life is hard to capture because it's not necessarily recorded in history. So, significant events for significant people, but so much is missed. And I think that's an interesting area where fiction can kind of come in and offer entertainment or insight.
And that's why we'll get back to your main character, Sophia, in 18 Days of Spring and Winter, who is a student and far from Tahrir Square, but she tells about the revolutions through the discussions and daily talks with taxi drivers, with the shoppers, etc. So we'll get back to that. Nadia, sorry,
I'm trying to explain to my family that if you take this, it's the Voilà. Pardon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, the same question about the style, because can we say that your book is like fictional biography, since you said it was your personal quest and you have two women in this story. You have Zahra, who is searching for her father, and this old Amazigh woman, Khadija, who is looking for her son. It's two women searching for the same man, not for the same reasons. So how is it to write this kind of book?
So originally, the title Half Truth referred to the fact that the novel was half memoir, half fiction. And Khadija's story was always fictionalized because I never met her and I didn't know the texture, the intricacies of her life. And so there were a lot of gaps in my understanding of my own story. And I really wanted to do that deep historical research about what was her life like. So that was always a fictionalized story. And it also, she was born in the 30s. She lived through a very interesting time in Moroccan history, through the independence, right through to...
Can you keep the mic closer?
Sorry,
thank you.
Sorry, I'm not used to being in such a noisy environment. But so Khadija, she lived through a very turbulent time in Moroccan history, and that was a very important part of her story, particularly as part of the story evolves. We understand that the missing man, Ahmed, has become involved in the political movement that leads to an assassination attempt on the King Hassan. So this story becomes very political as well as very personal. So there is definitely, it was never going to be purely memoir. It couldn't be purely memoir. It had to be this mix. And now the whole story has been fictionalized. In main part, the Zahra story was fictionalized, or my story was fictionalized, really to make it simpler, in terms of what happened in reality over 7 years in the novel then is plays out over 1 year. So there are just less moving parts, less characters, for example, because it's a dual timeline novel, so it's hard for the reader to keep track of. So reality is complicated, right? Novels need to fit a certain pattern, so we made it a little simpler. So that's why it's entirely fictionalized. But actually what I discovered in the writing...
Raise your voice, Nadia. We're talking about women raising their voices. Don't let the others speak louder. Speak louder.
Okay, sorry. Okay, sorry. It feels very loud. Yeah. But for me, I suppose the idea was that I wanted Zahra and Khadija to... The questions that remain in Zahra's story are answered in Khadija's timeline. Yeah.
Thank you. Mhani Alaoui, same question, because the first novel was written in a, can we say, magical realism style, because it's very fantastic somehow. And in the other stories, the style is different. So how do you link, same question, the style of your stories, the style you decide to choose, and also in the background, the big history, because one of your novel is also during the riots in 1981. It mentions them. So how do you link also the big history and the history of your characters? We'll get back later to the characters, but just about how you, the architecture of your books.
So the first one, Dreams of Mariam Taher, it's actually inspired by the Arab Spring as well. And it's the style just imposed itself because there are so many myths that we have here in Morocco that are really important to people. And there's also witchcraft, but there's also a belief in the occult that inhabits our lives. And so as an anthropologist, these are things that are very interesting for me. And so I decided to write in the magical realism style. Also, it was about the Arab Spring. So it was also maybe a way for me to express whatever I needed to express without feeling any censorship. The characters some are mythical characters. The storyteller is Shahrazad, but she's here as well. She inhabits our space. So it's about a woman telling stories to survive, and she's here. She's still here among us. The second one was about immigration and about the proximity that immigrants, the way they are treated in certain countries, is akin also to a form of, it can lead, I guess, to some form of mental illness. The way this kind of exile can be lived. And the third one, so it's, again, there are different topics each time. And the third one, I read Shouki Hamid's Black Morocco. It's about the history of slavery in Morocco, and it's work that hasn't been done at that level of research. Perhaps it has been done in Arabic, not that I'm aware of, but in French or English or any other language. I believe he is the first researcher to do this, and he's also a perfect Arabic speaker. So he went to the different archives all across the country, and he found all these ancient archives and oral archives about the history of slavery. And so I read this text, this book, Black Morocco, and actually he was my professor in college, so I knew him personally. And I thought this is the first time I hear a Moroccan actually talk about slavery in our societies in this academic way, without emotion, except maybe anger at the injustice, without trying to justify slavery, without talking about how, as Moroccans, we have felt with our dadas or the people who were enslaved, and also the fact that we are both enslavers and enslaved. So we are both. We are the product of that society, which has been ours for hundreds of years. So this is for this book, and it's in his book, so I'm not going to take credit for this, but he hints at the fact that women's and children's rights in Morocco today are probably linked to our history of slavery and not to Islam. Why? Because if you're an enslaved woman and you have a child, especially a son, with the master of the house, then it is possible for this child to be freed. And so it puts into question, what does it mean to be a family? What does it mean to have rights as a child, as a woman? What happens to orphans if they are, or to women who have children outside of wedlock? This lack of right of women and children born out of wedlock, he seems to suggest, is because of our history of slavery and enslavement, not because it's in Islam. And Islam was used as an excuse to justify this patriarchy. And so this was the basis of my book. So as you can tell, social sciences are very important for me when I write. And so that was that.
Thank you. And I think that's maybe something also that you share, the will to shed light on some parts of history, but from the people who are directly concerned and who went through it. Like when you mentioned the slavery, it's this character in your book, Dada Amber, in on old Moroccan aristocratic, especially houses in Morocco, there is a Dada which is a descent, who is a descent most of the time from slavery, and it's here, but no one talks about the whole history behind. So that's maybe a common point. I have a last question before we get deeper in your stories. One question about you are three women, Moroccan women, living in English-speaking countries. So you publish in English publishers and publishing houses. I want to ask a question about: are there any expectations in those countries, England, United States, Australia, when it comes to Moroccan / Arab / Muslim women deciding to write? Because most of the time, like in France, for example, there are some expectations. We expect them to talk about sexuality, about religion, about patriarchy. Is it the same in your countries? And what is your journey with your publishers?
So my case is a bit special because my publisher is actually Arab American. He's Palestinian originally, and he's used to having Arab voices. He brings Arab voices into the US. And so he doesn't have, on the contrary, he's decolonial. He doesn't have that kind of expectation at all. He knows the Arab world well. He's been to Morocco many times. Well, since the start of the genocide, he's more focused on Palestine and Lebanon, which is to be expected. But so he's used to bringing voices from the Arab world, and actually, I believe he's the first one to have brought Emil Malouf to the United States. So he's been doing this for a really long time, and now his daughters have taken over, and so they're the ones managing the publishing house. So in that sense, I'm very free. He doesn't have any expectations. I don't have to talk about how Moroccan women are submissive or how we are oppressed. He understands all the subtleties that come with our different societies and what happens. So I have that kind of freedom, but also he's a small publisher, so it's not the same kind of expectations as a big commercial publishers like Penguin or.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting because there's a very clear distinction in my mind between being a Moroccan writer in Australia and being an Arab writer in Australia, because Australia has a very large Arab diaspora from Lebanon and from Palestine and other parts of the Arab world, but very small Moroccan specific. So I would say that certainly there are expectations that come with being an Arab writer, and dangers as well. There is certainly, and increasingly so, censorship around Arab voices in Australia. But as a Moroccan, that's not something I have ever come across. Although when I first started pitching this novel, so I finished it in 2021, and the very first person that I showed it to said, look, I think this is publishable, but I don't think Australia will publish a novel set mainly in Morocco. They said you might have to find a small publisher that would look at publishing something that is set, the major part in Morocco. Within 2 years, I had a major publisher with Penguin Random House deal, but also not only me, there were multiple very successful Arab writers who have kind of risen to prominence in Australia in the years following. So it has changed incredibly fast. And I'm very aware that change, the fact that it has changed so fast in the positive means it can also change that fast in the, it can go backwards as well, just as quickly as it kind of emerged. So we must be very careful to protect Arab voices, I think, diverse voices in literature. But certainly, look, there is an expectation that you will kind of somehow tear your heart open and tell your trauma stories. I think though my publisher really was actually, she loved discovering a new culture. She loved learning about Morocco. It was a history that she didn't understand. It was a world that she hadn't encountered before, and I think that was very exciting for her. So there was certainly, I haven't felt any pressure. I felt nothing but support, and that's wonderful. I feel very grateful.
Yeah, I think there is like a kind of gender bias and a racial bias in publishing in the UK. I think the research that is done by marginalised writers groups in the UK have kind of proven and demonstrated that. And I think that occurs for all kind of marginalised groups in the UK, whether it's based on your gender, race, disability, sexuality. There's an expectation that you kind of will write about your identity in a way that maybe white writers can write about anything. And that kind of continues to exist in the publishing industry. I think a lot happened after the George Floyd situation in the UK, where there was lots of soul searching in lots of industries, including in publishing, to try and create space for more diverse voices and facilitate their access to publishing. I think some of that has been reversed in recent years since then. So it's just a reality that you live with, and that you have to kind of find ways of resisting and not succumbing to. I think people want to hear women's kind of trauma porn, you know, tell us all about how hard life is for you as a brown woman or a black woman. And you know, we can all feel better about ourselves because we're not doing that to you. They are doing it. So, you know, that exists. And I think you have to kind of figure out what's important to you as a writer and stay close to that and not lose yourself in an attempt to be successful and kind of lose sight of what you're actually trying, what you want to write. So
it's very interesting because it's like three different relations or contexts for you to publish in those countries. But I'm happy that it went well for you, and you had nothing but a warm welcome. So it's very good to hear. Maybe now to get more to your, maybe the common points between you in your books. And the first one, of course, is your relation to Morocco, because one can ask, how come when you were born or lived a long time in other countries very far from Morocco, you have still this excitement about writing stories that happen in Morocco, except for your first book. We'll talk about it later and your character. And were you expecting or not any welcome in Morocco for your books? Were you expecting that someday, one day in May 2026, you would be sitting here talking about your books?
I love that question because this is a huge surprise to me. even as of a month ago, it was a huge surprise. I am absolutely hugely touched, but I never expected my book to find an audience in Morocco outside of Australia. I didn't even necessarily expect it to find an audience in Australia. That in itself was a surprise to me. But that said, you know, there is no greater dream for me than to have my, I don't know, we will maybe talk about this later, was to have my book translated into Arabic.
Yeah, actually, you can talk about it, because I was going to ask if it's important for you if one day it's translated in Arabic and if it can circulate here in Morocco.
I would absolutely love that. And the main reason for that is that I would desperately love my family to read their own story. I would desperately love that. And it's a Moroccan story. Perhaps it isn't... I perhaps don't have the average diaspora story because I didn't grow up with a lot of cultural knowledge that I feel I have had to discover. So that's why I think Morocco features heavily. You know, obviously this began as memoir, so it's clearly, you know, a personal story. But my next novel is pure historical fiction, and it's based in Morocco because I don't want to write about anywhere else. I don't want to spend my time researching about anywhere else. I want to know more and more and more about this country and about, you know, my own culture that I am rediscovering, you know, step by step. Every book I write, I learn more about the culture that I feel I want to know that is, you know, it's mine, and I want to learn.
Saeida,
Yeah, sure.
Because I think that after the first book you planned, where they published the next stories of your detective of Farouk, because after Marrakesh in 1906 he was supposed to go to Fez in 1912,
it's a long
again
story.
in a big history, and then he was supposed to go to Chefchaouen during the Rif War.
I'm going to cry. Stop talking about it. Seriously, it's so sad.
But it's interesting that after the first one you were curious about exploring the big history in other big cities in Morocco.
Yeah, so I signed a 3-book deal. So there was Assembly of the Dead, there was Library of Untruths, and then there was The Caravan of Despair, I think was the working title. So, and it was set in these significant moments of 1906, the the Al Jazeera's conference, 1912, the Treaty of Fez, 1921, the Reef Rebellion. So it showed that kind of period following through that period. But this publisher went bankrupt after COVID, and then in that time it's been transferred to a US publisher. So that period of waiting has just delayed things, and it was recently sold to Arabic. So it's in process of translation to Arabic, which is something that I'm really happy about, because obviously Morocco, English isn't the first language of the majority of Moroccans, and it becomes very odd to speak about this book when you know that there's a lot of people that can't access it. So it's great that people, more Arabic readers can begin can access it. I think that's my understanding is that will be released in like the end of 2027, inshallah. That's what I've been told. I think if you treat being Moroccan and British as a binary, then you start going, why are you interested in Morocco? But it's not a binary when it's your lived reality, right? For me, the way I see it is that I have an internal universe, and when you write, you don't really know what's going to come out of it. You just hope for the best. You say, were you expecting to be sitting here? There were moments where I wasn't expecting to finish the book, if I'm honest. I was like in despair at what I'd signed up for. But you just kind of allow it to unfold for you without restricting yourself to this kind of binary that I understand people put you in, but it's not how you experience who you are walking through the world. I think, sorry, just to add, when you grow up in the UK as a Moroccan and you go through a British education system, you learn about the royal family, you learn about the Second World War, the First World War, and the establishment of the welfare state, blah, blah, blah. But what you don't learn about is Moroccan history. Yeah. So there is something inside you that feels inherited, but you don't know the details of. So I think it's about the kind of gaps inside you that you sense but can't put to words, that find their way out maybe in writing or in other forms. And so it doesn't feel separate in that way. They don't feel distinct. They just feel like messy and just integrated inside.
Okay. I love this conversation because sometimes it looks like a writing coaching session. So I really love it. Nadia, Alaoui, one question, because even in Ayadane, even if your character is living in the United States, she explores her memories back in Morocco and her traumas back in Morocco. So same question, this relation to Morocco and the importance of translating the books from Moroccans, either in French or Arabic.
So I'll start with your last question first. My first book was actually translated into Arabic. For some reason, it never made it here. It's still in the Middle East. Not the second one. This one I'm still waiting. It's kind of new. So I hope it will be translated into Arabic or French. Again, my publisher right now is pretty obsessed with Palestine. So we have to wait a little for him to. So I don't know if anybody knows this or if anyone studied the social sciences in the United States, but if you study anthropology in the US, it's actually you're studying decolonial studies. That's really what you're studying. And so this is where I read the most about researchers and academics from our part of the world or from India. So when I studied there was the Sabatri Study School, which is from India, and how they were anthropologists who took over the whole narrative of the British Empire, and their work was amazing. And all of the researchers were in American universities, most of them in New York. And then you had the South Africans, the most famous were the Comarovs, and they were in Chicago. And then you had Abu Lurud, who's Egyptian. And of course you had Edward Said, who was not an anthropologist, but we studied, I think we read all his books. So it is, so when you're studying anthropology in the United States, at least in the schools I went to, you're basically studying us. So it's what we call the return of the native, or the native anthropologist, because anthropology to begin with is a colonial study. It belonged to the French Empire, the British Empire, and then there's a switch after decolonization where the native anthropologists took over this colonial science and made it theirs, and it became a very powerful tool. So it was just almost natural, first of all, to study this. Well, nothing is natural, but it was natural for me to study this, and also natural for me to change this lens towards my country, which also was studied a lot by the colonial anthropologists who were here. Geertz, who was one of the main American anthropologists, and all his work here in Morocco is colonial studies. But then one of my professors was Abdullah Hamoudi, whom I suppose you know, who was a professor at Princeton. And so just studying with him, yeah, really, his Maître disciple, Master and Disciple, is a phenomenal book about Morocco and power. And the reproduction of power in Morocco. So it was almost natural for me. So I love reading academic texts, but I don't enjoy writing academic texts. I prefer the freedom of novels, which is why I do it this way, because I guess maybe a little lazy. I prefer doing it this way.
Your books lead to reflection anyway, to thinking about all the social issues that you raise. And here comes the next questions about the social questions you raise. You have a lot of female characters in your book, if not mainly female characters. The exception is your detective, Saeida Farouk. But in your first book, it's Sophia, a student, and it's all the Egyptian revolution through her eyes and her daily life, and how history is not only written in Tahrir Square or in the media, but also in the daily life with ordinary people. And I want to ask you, the three of you, the question about those ordinary people, and especially those ordinary women who have so much to say about what's going on. Saeida, maybe about this character?
Yeah, I think, like, in Assembly, one of the things I discovered about when I was looking at all the archives and the newspapers is there was no account of who these women were. They were kind of just a number, like he killed this many, and then he did this to them, and that was it.
And we were also hearing a lot about the sexual aggressions of women in Tahrir Square and things like that. That's the only moments we heard about women during that revolution.
Yeah, during the revolution, there was a kind of conversation. I remember in the Arab Spring, there was a conversation about how the kind of gender revolution has to wait because we've got something more important to do right now. And let's just park that. We can't deal with everything at one go. Let's just deal with the removal of this government, and then let's focus on getting women their rights. And to me that's absurd. You kind of can't just leave out a group of people because it's inconvenient and it underpins whatever. I'm going to go into a tangent. I'll stop. But the one thing that I remember is I lived in Zamalek.
Since the journalist here.
Forget it. I lived in Zamalek, and I don't know if anyone's been to Zamalek, but it's a very middle class neighborhood of Cairo, and you can live and it's an island in the Nile, so you can almost feel like you're not in this city with 20 million people, and it's very cool and a nice place to be. And I worked with middle class young Egyptian women, and when I left I thought, well, what happened to them? Right, did they go to Tahrir Square? Like, how did this immense event that's upturning the country kind of enter into their lives, or did they manage to live in this enclave and stay away from it? And I thought that's the interesting part, is where's the revolution in that neighborhood? How is it being played out for people in their homes as well? What is it doing to families? So you have Sophia, who's this kind of person that's being drawn into this movement because it resonates with her, but there's other people of her family who are experiencing it in different ways because of their positionality in the family, like her father. It's something, for me, it's the kind of notion of the private and the public and where those lines are drawn, and if they can be drawn at all, right? And that's the boundary that I was interested in, is playing with this idea of a very out public event, but how is it influencing that very private moment in the home, and I found that part of it interesting.
Nadia, same question, and maybe in the sense of what is the function or the role you assign to literature in raising attention or awareness about women's rights, women's place, women's history, and maybe you can here talk also about your podcast. Because you are women, maybe mothers who are also writing, so you use also this platform added to the literature to raise this awareness. Can you tell us more about it?
Sure, absolutely. So thank you. I always wanted this novel to be a story. It's about a missing man, but I didn't want this story to be about this man. I wanted the story to be about the women who live in his absence. So about how do you live without, what has his absence shaped these women's lives? And I really wanted to, I didn't want it to be about him. I wanted it to be about these women who have carried his choices and lived with his choices for good or bad. And so that was really important to me. And the reason for that is that, I have had two obsessions probably throughout my life, and I've come at them in different directions. One is identity and my identity as a Moroccan and finding more about that. The other is motherhood. And those two things come together very, very quickly in this novel. It's a book about motherhood, and part of that
reason... just say why, because your character, Zahra, decides to come to Morocco search for her dad after she got her firstborn baby.
Right. So Zahra, based on my own story, I had my first child, and for the first time in my life, I met another human being that resembled me. I had never seen someone else. I'd never met another Moroccan person. And all of a sudden with this child, I knew I needed answers for him. I needed to be able to tell this baby, who are you? Where do you come from? What is it to be Moroccan? And to be able to give him those answers, I needed to know for myself. So that was, in 1999, I took my baby to Morocco, to Marrakesh, with nothing more than the address that my mother remembered from telling the taxi drivers in the 1970s.
I think a photo of the wedding.
I had a photo of them on their wedding day. I sent a letter to this kind of, the suburb, and I said, look, if you want to see me, come to the post office.
Another detective in the heart of Marrakesh.
Yeah, that's right, in Marrakesh. Yeah, so I really didn't know anything even. So I checked every day the post office and no response. In the end, I caught a horse and cart, to the area. It was in Berima, in Marrakesh, and I got down and I looked around and I thought, what am I doing here? And so I took out the photo and I started just going up to strangers and showing them the photo and saying, I spoke no Darija, no French at this point, and I'm just pointing the photo and saying, Mahjouri, my name, and everyone's like, no, I'm busy, until one old man, he looked at the photo and he recognized something, and he kind of turned and he said, follow me, and I ran after him with my baby on my hip and my, big nappy bag, and we went down the little narrow alleyways until we came to this tiny little doorway, and he pointed and disappeared, and I just went, okay, well, I guess I'm going to knock, and so we knocked, and the beautiful woman that opened the door, I knew she wasn't my grandmother. She was too young to be my grandmother, but I didn't need to say a word. She knew who I was, and she started to cry, and 5 minutes later, my family came rushing in tears, including my beautiful aunt who's right here. It was the most magic experience of my life, and this family said, the first thing they said to me is when they found someone who spoke English, why are you so late? And I said, what do you mean? They said, we've been waiting a week for you. And it turns out I'd been going to the wrong post office. They had all come from all around Morocco to Marrakesh to see me. They had received the letter, but I'd been checking the wrong post office and therefore didn't turn up to the right house. Anyway, so I found this beautiful family. So I just wanted to honor that, I suppose, honor that lived experience, honor these beautiful women, who took me in as a stranger from another country and said, you are family, you are one of us, and yeah, that's been my entire desire the whole way through, is to build, to tell this story, to tell their story.
Thanks for sharing this. It's very moving. I wanted to laugh with you, but now you're going to make me cry. But maybe just your podcast about motherhood and
yes.
writing.
So
Did it come
so-
before your book or right after your book?
After my book. So when I say I've had two obsessions, I also studied philosophy for many years, and my work was in feminist philosophy and looking, at feminist philosophy and identity. And so I've come at this question to so many ways: motherhood, identity. So this is the most recent way, I suppose, for me to kind of come at this question. And part of the podcast is really talking to other authors about how they bring these two things together, how they bring motherhood and writing together. We have 5 children, my husband and I. So, motherhood is something I just don't get to forget about. I have to keep remembering. So it's a wonderful opportunity to speak to other people about other creative women about how in reality they balance the everyday, because I think sometimes there is this notion that, you read a lot of writing advice and it's don't let anyone interrupt your precious time, and it's, and you lock yourself away and you have the typewriter and so on, and no one, it doesn't work like that when you're a mother of, lots of children.
Maybe our friends here will have something to say also about that, about being a woman and creative woman. But Mhani, also the same question about the place of women in your books, because all your books have important women characters and the role you assign to literature to raise awareness about their situation.
So why do I have so many women characters in my books? So there's this idea that I've always been interested in, this what is patriarchy? So the way most of us would think of patriarchy is men versus women, or men oppressing women. But really, patriarchy is about roles and power, so gender roles, power relations. So it's not men versus women, it's gender roles and power relations. So when you have different kinds of women, then it's easier to play with that idea of what is patriarchy. So you have, the Kimberly Crenshaw intersectionality, where you have gender, race, class, and sexuality, disability, that came later. And I thought all of that was really interesting, and it's a way to talk about different types of oppressions, different types of power. But also what I find the most interesting is class. So in American theory, they tend to obfuscate class. It's not there, but it's everywhere. And so with my characters, especially in this one, there are different classes of women. There's an enslaved woman, there's the West African immigrant, there's the bourgeois woman, but she has no independence and no autonomy. And then there's her daughter who to take over some kind of control of her life, just stops talking. And so there's all these different kinds of women, and the woman who disappears, who they're also looking for. So it's a form of detective story as well. So for me, it's a way of showing, first of all, this great diversity, but also how patriarchy functions. And it's not men versus women; it's this kind of structure of power. And so it's maybe more subtle for me, more fun also to show it via different kinds of women. And being a mother, it's not possible. It's very hard to do both at the same time, so I commend you. It's very difficult to do both. I think that's why there were so many male authors for a long time, because they didn't have to take care of their kids, or why you have like Virginia Woolf, who is probably the greatest. Bravo. Yeah, bravo. That's exactly it. She said it all. It's, a room of one's own. What is a room of one's own? We're still looking for that room of one's own. Yeah, so I find it extremely difficult and frustrating, which is why it takes so long I have 3 kids, 3 books.
Thank you very much. I have a last question, so you can maybe have your own time to ask them further questions. But my last one would be about, we witness a strong feminization of literature from Moroccan diaspora. Do you think of any reasons to explain that? Is it because we have a generation of women now who are educated abroad and who feel more free to tell their stories? And what do you think? Maybe it's a tough question, but I'm trying it. What do you think the diaspora literature bring to Moroccan literature? I told you it's a tough one. Go
ahead, Nadia. Look, I will try, but I don't also feel very unqualified to speak on Moroccan literature in general because I don't read in Arabic. So I feel like I'm probably missing a huge amount.
No, it's not about the Moroccan literature, but the fact that you are from a diaspora, so
Sure.
with very different stories, and it's like a puzzle that it's starting to emerge, because we don't know many of the stories of women who are descendants of immigrants in those countries, especially because most of the time we have French writers, since it's the country who has welcomed the most the Moroccan population and diaspora. So do you think it can also bring something else, something new, something different?
I think every voice that appears in literature that is unique, that is honest, that is true, brings something unique, something important, and therefore I think anyone writing, from a new perspective, and maybe that's why we're hearing more people writing women characters, more female writers, because we're all trying to do something that's not been done, and while there are only so many kind of, stories about heroes, there are so many stories about unsung heroes, there are so many stories about women that haven't been told, and we are simply redressing an eon, kind of like an age-old imbalance. So we have a long way to go yet. So everyone that thinks they might write a story, please do it.
Okay. Saeida?
It's a complicated question. I think, when I think about UK when I think about UK literature set in Morocco, I think often it's like, you okay? There's a kind of exoticization of Morocco. Yeah. So you have these European main characters, and in the background are the dunes of the Sahara Desert.
It's the Sex and the City movie.
Well, there's that as well. But that goes back to, is it Edith Barton? I think she wrote something in 1912 or something, or 21. And it's still that kind of notion of Morocco being the backdrop of the interesting lives of these intrepid European explorers. And I think that translates to modern literature written about Morocco. I just think that probably this happening is just a product of globalization. I think globalization is something that's affected all of us, and it's in all of our lives in the ways that we are connected to the world, and our connections to our origins feel closer than they might have been 50, 60 years ago. So for me, it's what we might be bringing is a kind of release of these narrow stories of Morocco, and that this kind of narrow perception that's rooted in what you were describing around anthropology and all of that has its roots in there, and has become like the liberation of characters because they're in this exotic place. So I think it just brings a different version, a different way of telling a story that's rooted in this kind of global world where we're so interconnected. We want to know about everywhere and everything.
I would love to have 1 more hour to talk with you, because what you're saying, when I'm talking about also the French-speaking writers, sometimes we have to face this kind of exotization, and maybe it's because we've been colonized by France, so it maintains a sort of mentality that we find in the literature, which we don't find in the other languages literature of the diaspora, either in a little in Spanish, but a little less than French, but not at all in the English-speaking writers.
I'm ashamed to say, actually, I never thought of that, but you're absolutely right. It's a really good point. It's we weren't colonized by the Americans or the British, not yet, at least.
So we are speaking English, so maybe.
So about just simply, it's wonderful to have diversity and diasporas, and the fact that with small events like these, that we're connecting to each other across space, across, continents. It's wonderful, these dialogues. Also, what is interesting, if you put yourself in, I think, in the position of writing or doing art or doing anything that takes you away from yourself, there's this, I don't know if anybody has read this beautiful, beautiful text by Georges Simenon, as 19th century French sociologist, who actually was Jewish, and it's a beautiful text called L'étranger, the stranger. And basically he said the stranger is the one who shapes society, so he's the one, well, he said he's the one in the marges, so you'll have the philosopher, the prophet, the wandering Jew, the people who are outside the wall, les banlieues. So banlieue, the suburbs, but banlieue really means les lieux de bannis, the people who are the banned people. So for him, you have to have that kind of position, even if you're not banni or an actual stranger. You have to take on that kind of distance to be able to write or think. And so in that way, creatively about your society at large. So diaspora is the actualization of that kind of exile, but for similar to you have to put yourself in the posture of l'étranger to be able to do that. So I think it's fundamental to anyone who wants to try that exercise.
Thank you so much for all these inputs and very interesting conversation. So now maybe if you have questions, it's the time. We still have maybe 10 minutes. Yes, madame. Ah, est-ce qu'on a un micro? Ah, merci.
Non, je comprends, mais peut-être que je vais...
C'est maintenant que tu me le dis que tu peux parler français? Khalik.
Allez.
Bonsoir, mesdames.
Bonsoir.
Et tout le monde comprend le français? Non? Et l'arabe? Non. Ah, voilà. D'accord. Ah, c'est bon?
Elle a la traduction. Allez-y, vous pouvez vous exprimer en français, pas de problème.
Bonsoir, mesdames. Je tiens à vous dire combien était touchante votre très belle intervention. Je regarde qu'il y a 3 titres différents, tout aussi inspirants les uns que les autres. Vos personnalités sont extrêmement inspirantes aussi, notamment Madame Nadia Mahjouri. Vous me rappelez infiniment Madame Fatima Mernissi, mais vous n'avez pas idée à quel point je vous souhaite la même vie. Elle était anglophone. Elle était anglophone et je vous promets que vous avez tout un package d'elle. Et par contre, moi, ce que m'inspire cette magnifique assemblée, c'est 24 heures avant, j'étais à l'assemblée de 4 jeunes Marocaines de France, Marocaines du monde, qui ont eu la merveilleuse idée, soutenue par le CCME et par l'ambassade de France, de coécrire...
L'ambassade du Royaume du Maroc en France.
L'ambassade, merci 1000 fois, l'ambassade du Royaume du Maroc en France, donc soutenue par ces 2 entités solides. Elles ont vécu la magnifique expérience à 8 mains, donc, d'écrire les mémoires de vie. C'est le titre du livre qui raconte la vie des personnes émigrées des années 60 qui aujourd'hui ont 80, 90 ans. Et il y en a même qui sont partis, qui ne sont plus de ce monde depuis leur rencontre. Et plus je vous observe et plus je me dis que cette expérience pourrait être très belle à vivre pour vous 3. En tout cas, moi, j'aimerais beaucoup la lire et merci encore.
Merci beaucoup. D'accord. Allons-y. Pourquoi pas? Non,
I think it was also a question about the idea of writing the memories of the first Moroccan immigrants in your countries, in your respective countries.
All about as you wish. Savoir le premier Marocain en Australie, je sais pas. Do you know the first Moroccans in Australia? No, I'm asking the Australian ambassador to Morocco.
You need a statue in Australia if she's the first one.
I will find out. Yeah.
Saeida?
I mean, I just thank you for sharing that. I don't think I have a response. I haven't written about that.
Okay. There's another. Il y a encore une question? Non? J'avais vu le micro. C'est comme la vente aux enchères. Je vais faire un. Pas de question. Est-ce que vous, do you want to add something, a last word for our assembly? Expect, of course, you can buy their books and you can have a signature right there behind at the stand, but do you want to add a last word?
I do not. But can I ask you a question, or is that not part of the format? I'll ask you. I was. What do you think of the diaspora writing? Why? And what kind of impact? As a journalist, I don't know. Honestly, I'm very curious to hear.
Honestly, because I grew up in France, so I know better the literature in France. Most of the times, I have to confess, and I'm sorry because I'm very true, but I'm most of the time disappointed because the matters are almost always the same, and I feel like it is an obligation French Moroccan writer to talk about sexuality or about religion to get published, and that makes me sick because I left France 12 years ago. I grew up there, I studied there, but I came back to Morocco 12 years ago. And I was sick because I realized that to be considered as a free woman, I had to show every day that I was freed from my culture, from my religion, from my family power, etc. And I hated that because actually I never had to fight my dad to go study. I never had to do, and I tried to publish book by the Times, an essay about Islamic feminism, and I left. That's the moment I left France because they were telling me either you are an Islamist girl and you defend Islamic feminism, or you are a laicist and you don't like Islamic feminism. But for me, Islamic feminism was okay if it was a tool to achieve women's rights in some countries, but not if it was becoming an end, an objective. And no publisher would understand that. They wanted like to do their marketing, like either you're pro-Islamist or you're totally against. And that's one of the reasons I left France, the main reason why I left France.
You should write it in English.
Yeah. I just want to, I would love to add that, I mean, and this is just a very self-indulgent personal moment, so excuse me, but for me there's such a beautiful... Okay, it's time to leave. I will shut up. No, but I just want to say that there is, for me, this most beautiful moment, and I was asked by these beautiful women before one word, and I'm not very good at one word. That's why it takes me 80,000 words to write something to tell my story. I need a whole book, but the one word, and it's not the word I chose because I needed more words to explain it, but the word I wanted to choose was, and it was to describe the experience here at CCME, at CL, Avec, with this whole experience. And for me, it was integration. And the reason I chose integration is this is an incredible moment for me in bringing together the parts of my identity. You know, I'm sitting here with a part of me that is, you know, the Australian representatives here. And I'm able to be here completely Australian, and I am as Australian as, you know, it's possible to be. But at the same time, I'm here with my beautiful Moroccan family, and I'm here in Morocco, and I am a Moroccan writer, and I'm here as the, you know, CCME as a Moroccan, you know, and I am Moroccan as Moroccan, a real Moroccan, you know, so I'm a real Moroccan, I'm a real Australian, and I just feel like, for me personally, this is such a profound moment of integration, and I'm just so very grateful to everyone that's been part of making it happen, so thank you.
I don't think I have anything to add, really, except I think there's like I don't know if you've heard of the Olive Writers in Casablanca, but they're a lovely young group, like collective of young writers, and I think they do lovely work around supporting young writers who are writing in English, and I think that's a really important space. I wish they had more support, because the infrastructure doesn't exist in Morocco for them to end in a publishing deal, which I think is really frustrating for them. I think there's definitely something in Morocco where English feels like a language that offers a freedom that French doesn't offer. And I think that is because of it being the language of the colonizers. I think English is still a language of a colonizer, but just not ours, and the Moroccans. So living in the UK brings that up, because you see what the implications are when your heritage is immigration. It's not a perfect world, but I think ultimately, I often wonder why people, I know Darija is a spoken language, but it's also written, it's also in a written form, and I wonder why we don't find, I hope that we also one day find freedom in our indigenous languages too, and in our Darija that we've developed out of history. I think that is where maybe more freedom lies as well, right? In that kind of language, and something that's kind of baked into our psyche in a way that we maybe don't fully understand. And so I think there's lots of potential to go in all different directions in that way.
Thank you very much. It's an important topic, and just an idea. Let's work on a publishing house here in Morocco for those young Moroccan writers. Why not?
I love that.
Thank you so much, the three of you, for your books, for your authenticity, for your writing coaching moments, and for sharing also parts of your life and your writing journey. Thank you very much, and hope to meet you soon again. Thank you.